Good morning, world. Welcome back to ADDICTS VOICE. Today I want to discuss a little bit about what people believe and what you believe in terms of your worldview and in terms of your recovery from substances. For us, it's a very simple and basic concept in terms of a recovery, but to achieve the goals of the simple and basic concept can sometimes leave people in quite a quandary. Over the last week, I've had a couple of discussions about the Christian worldview versus the worldview of the atheist and the agnostic. And during the course of research that I did and some studying that I've been doing, I found some interesting articles and I found some interesting viewpoints in terms of upon whom does the burden of proof lie in one's belief system. And the reality is that your belief system really requires very little to no evidence to be true for you as an individual. So most people's belief systems aren't really based on evidentiary things. So when we say things like we believe in God, and people say, well, there's no evidence for God. We would say, well, that may be true, but that does not detract from the fact that I still believe what I believe. If you look at what a lot of people believe about a lot of things, there's very little evidence scientifically, if you will, or there's very little evidence experientially for their belief system. You watch programs on television. I'm quite a big fan, and I watch quite regularly a show called Ancient Aliens, because although my primary worldview and belief system is 100% Christianity, I like to see what is out there and what is available, because really in my mind I'm trying to seek truth. And in my life, the only real solid steadfast truth that I've found is to be found in the ancient texts as they present themselves in the biblical scriptures. Having said that, it's not like I haven't looked at other religions. A lot of people like to throw a lot of argument my way in saying things like, well, I don't believe, you don't believe in 2,999 other gods. I only believe in, I only do not believe in one more than yourself. If that's your viewpoint, that's great. Other people will say, if God is real, why is there evil still in the world? Why doesn't God just cancel evil? And I can go into that argument for about an hour and a half on its own. The reality is, let me just give you the basics about why there is evil. There is evil not because God created evil. There is evil because God created man and God created angels. And God gave angels and man the ability of freedom of choice. This is what makes us unique in the whole of the natural and supernatural element that we exist in. God, according to what we taught, and a lot of people give me all these long stories about how Adam and Eve could never have been true because it's impossible that the whole world could have come from two people. Well, it's crazy that people would say that, because the same people will tell me that the whole world came from one single-celled organism, over periods of millions and millions of years. People say that, the Bible says Adam and Eve are only 10,000 years old, and it's not realistic because science has found fossils and all these kinds of archaeological evidences that point in a different direction. This is not the point of the story of Genesis. The story of Genesis, first of all, is never designed and was never designed to be a scientific textbook. You've got to grasp that. The book of Genesis is not a scientific thesis by a scientist or a physicist. The book of Genesis is the creation story to help explain why man primarily is in the position he's in now, all right, with the troubles and the evil in the world that we experience now starts in Genesis. And second of all, it's the beginning stages of the development of man towards God. Man was put in the garden. The garden, the Bible says it was a garden somewhere in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, right? That's what it says. And it says that these people were put there and were given the choice to listen to what God told them and choose God, or to listen to what the opposing force to God, which is represented by a snake, which we still use today. That guy, God does you some harm. That guy's a snake. God backstabs you. God commits fraud against you. God steals from you. That guy's a flipping snake. So we still use that same terminology today because of the biblical connection in terms of the snake represents darkness. The snake represents demonic forces that had already made a choice to try, or not try, that made a choice to separate themselves from God's grace, to separate themselves from God's love, to come up in rebellion against God. And God, according to the scriptures, then cast them down to earth, to roam the earth. God then creates a safe space for man and puts man in the safe space, which is referred to as the Garden of Eden. And then what happens is this dark force takes on the form of a snake, according to the scripture, right? You don't have to believe this. All you have to understand is that there was a choice to be made, a choice between what the dark forces had to say and the choice of what God had to say. And man then rebels against God by choosing to go his own way, by choosing to accept knowledge, by choosing to accept the knowledge that comes with standing on your own 2 feet outside of the grace and love and protection of God. And this immediately separates them from God. And God says, okay, fine, you now are on your own. Now that choice we call already sin, which is a concept, right? This is how evil entered the world. Evil is the display of man's choices against the godly order. Therefore, evil is not created by God. Evil is a result of man's proclivity to continually go against what God has ordained for man to have the best life, right like it happened in the garden, right? Now, this is written in a book, right? And people say, well, you know, that book is a fairy tale and that book is same as believing Santa Claus stories, and you might as well believe Little Red Riding Hood and, you know, the Big Bad Wolf. However, the problem arises that as we move through the book of Genesis and into the Bible, every historical fact that is mentioned in the Bible can be cross-referenced to ancient texts, hieroglyphic writings, Sumerian writings, and is 100% concurrent with the events of 8, 9, 10, 6,000 years ago. The kings existed. The people that are mentioned existed. The places, some of them still exist. Those that don't exist anymore, many archaeological artifacts have been found to prove their existence. We read the stories of Moses going through the Red Sea. Everybody said it's impossible. Everybody said it can't happen. Everybody. Now, recently, divers, archaeologists, etc., have found evidence of an army that was somehow drowned in the Red Sea. They're finding chariot wheels, they're finding spearheads, they're finding human remains, they're finding the remains of horses, they're finding all kinds of historical artifacts that point to the fact that somehow an army of Egyptian origin was drowned in the Red Sea. We have these ancient proofs. We have the Word of God, the Bible, which speaks to a certain time, to a certain people in a certain region. And we have the historical proofs of these events having taken place. Now, we've got to start coming to the belief portion of this thing, where we look at what history tells us and we look at what the Bible tells us separately. History doesn't tell us that a bunch of Jews or Israelites left Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. The Bible tells us that. But the areas and the other historical facts are accurate. So when we start talking about, did God free them? Did God bring the plagues? Did God do the Passover? Did God do all these things that we read about in the Bible? This is where we have to now step into what is called faith and say, well, based on the evidence of history, based on the evidence of culture, based on what we know about where the Israelis come from, based on what we know about the region, is it a fair assumption, based on all those facts, that the biblical text may be true? And then you measure that up to on an equation of probability. And you make a decision and you make a choice. Are you going to believe what the Word says, or are you not going to believe what the Word says? Based on historical accuracy, based on cultural accuracy, and based on archaeology, that we know these places existed, these people were there. And now you just got to decide, what these people write, is it real? Is it true? And you choose to believe it or you choose not to believe it. Now, if you choose to believe it, then there's no way that somebody can tell you that is an illogical, irrational belief system, because you choose to believe what you have read based on historical accuracy. That's the first thing. The other thing is this, is that people look at the Bible and they try and nitpick certain stories in the Bible and say, well, that's unlikely, that's not true, that's illogical, that is contradictory, this, that, all the rest. And I want to say to you, there's nothing illogical and there's nothing contradictory. You might think it's a contradiction because your mind and my mind are unable to process what is actually allowed, what is actually able to be done in dimensions that we do not operate in. We operate in the dimension of earth, the world, the natural order. We have a natural body, we breathe natural gas, we eat organic foods, we drink water, and we can perceive with our eyes only what our natural eyes can perceive. However, more and more physics, and particularly quantum physics, is proving that there are other planes of existence that coexist with us. In other words, multi-dimensions. Now, when you look at what is possible in other dimensional thinking and outside of our natural dimensional thinking, it's actually quite frightening when you think about it. You have these great minds like Einstein and these types of Isaac Newton and Leonardo da Vinci and these types of really, really clever people that have proven to us that there's a lot happening that we're not aware of. And when you think about a creator or a God that is able to operate within multiple planes of existence at the same time, who looks at the timeline from a position of outside. In other words, he doesn't look at the timeline from a position of the beginning and an end. Where God is, he can see all time, all the time. And so when something that has that ability is speaking into an existence that is bound by time, is bound by space, is bound by nature, a lot of what is said seems illogical to us because we are not able to function at that level. It seems contradictory to us because we are unable to function at that level. And so we start understanding that the reality is that what we find to be illogical or contradictory is not actually illogical or contradictory. It's just the fact that we do not understand it at this point because we are unable with our finite minds to comprehend these things. And so in order to write off something because we just don't understand it, is our natural inclination. And our natural inclination, like I posted on Facebook yesterday, is this. Everybody knows at some level that there is something else that is operating around us outside of our five senses. We all know it. This is why we cling to all these things that we cling to. We cling to UFOs. We cling to ghost stories. We cling to supernatural miracles that happen in people's lives. I don't want to sound like one of these super healing pastors that, claims all these miracles happen in his church. But I personally have witnessed people cured of terminal diseases through prayer. I've seen it happen. I've personally witnessed someone's appendage get healed through prayer. I've personally witnessed the manifestation of supernatural entities in someone through prayer. These are things that I've witnessed. These are experiential events that formulated this mindset. I'm a guy that doesn't just hang on to any straw that is presented to me. This is why I specifically stuck to Christianity. I looked at Islam. I looked at Buddhism. I looked at Scientology. I looked at Hinduism. I looked at all these religions as a way for me to start trying to make some kind of meaning out of my life, to try and make me understand what is Dave doing on planet Earth? Why is Dave here? Why is Dave going through this experience? Who is Dave? And this took me on a hectic road, trying to figure out who I am, why I am, what I'm doing here. Is there a purpose for me? Or am I just another one of 8 billion organisms running around trying to consume and feed myself, procreate, and then die? And for me, that really made no sense. It really, it got me to a place of really depression because I thought, if that is life, you're born, you go through the struggles you go through in childhood, you become an adult, you have children, you go through those struggles. Not that I don't have children, but, which is a choice that I made based on my previous worldview, okay? And you have these children, these children grow up, they rebel against you, cast you to the side, you make enough money to live the last 10, 15 years of your life comfortably, and then you die and you're dead. And that's your life. So your life literally is, I'm here to consume, procreate, and die. Now, to look at that and keep a positive outlook is, in my mind, impossible. Impossible. I look at people who invest all their time, everything they have, their children become their gods. And their whole life is creating a better life for their children, and their children must succeed, and their children must achieve, and their children must have enough. And there's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, abandon your children. But what I'm saying is this, is that ultimately you've got to understand that your children are going to go through the exact same process that you are trying to avoid going through by putting all your focus and attention on your children. They're going to stop being children. They're going to be adults. They're going to have children, and they're going to die. And now you're dead as well. So you are never going to see the results of all this work that you put into these children, because you're dead according to your worldview. There's nothing after this. There's nothing better than this. There's nothing to look forward to. For me, if there's no hope of something better after this existence on earth, quite honestly, I would be a prime candidate for ending it. But in the message of the gospel and the message of the Bible, we understand that, you know what? God has a plan in all of this. All of this. The trials, the tribulations, the bad things you see. People keep saying, but God is allowing thousands and thousands of children to die in war. What kind of a God is that? And our response as Christians to atheists would be, well, you are allowing thousands and thousands and thousands of children to die in war. What kind of a person are you? So because these things are happening around the world and you're not doing anything to stop them, you would then be as bad as the God you don't believe in. And people get shocked when I say that to them. How many starving people do you drive past every single day and don't help? Why is God allowing starvation? God is allowing starvation for humanity to display God to the starving. That is why the things that we regard as evil and bad are evil and bad. But even in the evil and the bad, there's a purpose of God at play. Without evil and bad, you are unable to display your goodness, and God is unable to display his goodness through the goodness of his people upon the people that are experiencing the evil and bad things that are brought upon them by the decisions of evil and bad people. Not God. Not God. But there were wars in the Old Testament, and God sent people to kill other nations, and that absolutely 100% that happened. But when you look at why it happened, it changes the context of the story. God was trying to establish a nation through which he could bring a bloodline, through which he could bring the Messiah, through which he could bring salvation to the world. That was the plan. And if you see who God instructed these people to wipe out, it falls right in line with your idea of why does God allow evil? The people that the tribe of Israel wiped out were people that were engaged in paganist worship, through which sexual blood rituals were part of the game, and infanticide and the murder of children and sacrifice of children to their gods was par for the course. Those are the people that God instructed the Israelites to wipe out. So God is doing something then about evil. Then you flip it around and say, but God is killing innocent people. Well, God is cleaning bloodlines. And this is what you've got to understand. The story of the Bible is a story of history. It's a story of the history of God's chosen people and the birth and bringing into creation the Messiah, through which all people can come back into contact with God with a clean slate under the blood of the sacrificial lamb, so that we can have a dialogue and be reunited with God and live a proper life. This is why I choose Christianity over any other religion. Christianity is not the story of man or of God, of man doing all kinds of rituals and sacrifices to please God in order to hopefully one day get into heaven a place of unknown location. This is the story of a loving God coming into the natural order of man and displaying himself to man and showing man what is expected of man in order that he can reconcile himself with men and women who are born sinful and have evil intentions to reconcile them to himself in order that he can have an ongoing and everlasting dialogue and existence with his people. And this is what we choose to believe. Now, you say to me, well, you must bring proof that God exists. The Bible proves God exists. It's written testimony by hundreds of people, written in 44 books over 4,000 years, by people who have physically experienced God and written it down. We have books of history written by other historians that confirm many of the things that are written about, particularly in the New Testament, particularly about Jesus Christ. My favorite one is, there was no such man as Jesus Christ. Listen, my friend, you must be a complete and utter imbecile if you believe that no man called Jesus Christ walked the earth. It is undisputed historical fact. They have records of the trial of Christ by Pontius Pilate. They have records by Jewish historians that tell us that this thing happened and that this man was crucified. We have written evidence by people who saw him after he was dead, walking around alive. Written evidence by eyewitnesses, hundreds of them. No, we don't believe that. It's all made up. It's a fairy tale. Well, then if it's a fairy tale and it's all made up, I've got bad news for you. The Emperor of Rome, a culture and civilization that ruled the world for over 1,000 years, he changed the official religion of Rome because 12 men who were there and saw what happened went into the world and started telling the world what they had witnessed. And people started to believe them. And as more and more people started to believe them, more and more people started to experience this God through the love and grace of Jesus Christ. And this thing took off like wildfire and crushed every single other religion in the region, and then went out and conquered the world. The world upon which our civilization as we know it now is built. The date, your birthday, is marked as an event on a calendar that was changed by the Emperor of Rome based on the fact that he believed that Jesus Christ was God and that the sacrifice of Jesus Christ was real. And he wanted to earmark that and honor that for all eternity going into the future. That he changed the date from the day Jesus was born to now, we're 2025 years later. And people go, well, why hasn't God shown up for 2025 years? Brother, if you go look at the time frames in the Bible, you'll understand that 2025 years for God is a pinch of salt in the ocean. The Bible tells us that people live 900 years. You go, oh, that's impossible. Is it? Is it really? Have you looked at the science? of 10,000 years ago? Have you looked at the amount of oxygen available in the air? Have you looked at the lack of carcinogens? Have you looked at the health of people that lived those years? Is it really impossible? So here we sit. What do you believe? And why do you believe it? Well, I can tell you from my perspective that I've experienced God's love. How have I experienced God's love? I was a brutal man, a hurtful man, and a hurt man. I used to commit violence and experience violence at a level very, very few people have experienced in their lives. I was a drug addict. I destroyed many people. Emotionally, mentally, even physically. And yet when I reached out to God, God gave me the opportunity to experience His all-forgiving grace and mercy. And it gave me a new hope. It gave me the idea that, you know what, I don't need scientific proof, right? I don't need it. It means nothing to me because I've experienced the love and grace of God. That's all I need. So you can come with whatever story you want. It means nothing to me. For me, the Bible is true because it's the Bible that gave me my life back. It's the God of that Bible that gave me my life back. To the point where I'm completely consumed with understanding the Bible and completely consumed with understanding God and completely consumed with showing other people that come to this establishment the love of God and how it can change their lives. Consumed, absorbed. I've walked away from friendships. I've walked away from associations. I've walked away from churches because my only interest is God and how God can help people like me and how people like me can become servants of God and help more people like me. That's my interest. I know it's very difficult for you to understand when you're earning 200,000 Rand a month and you've got a nice house and a nice car and everything looks great. You don't need God. Therefore, you don't need to believe in God. But let me tell you something, my friend. You better hope and pray that your life is always like that. That you never have to deal with a terminal disease in a young child. That you never have to deal with a terminal disease in yourself. That you never have to deal with a horror situation for which there's no answer and explanation. And the only way out is to get on your knees and hope and pray that this non-existent God somehow steps into your reality and helps you. I said it to an individual this week. I said, no one needs God until they need God. And I've experienced that on the battlefield. Not the battlefield as you know it. Not Iraq, Iran, and all these places. We had our own battlefield here in Johannesburg. When the bullets start flying, you will be amazed how many people start talking to God. When people are lying on their deathbed, you will be amazed how many of them start speaking to God. One thing you need to realize is that you're a finite organism. Your life is going to end, and your opinions are also going to end. And then you're going to drift off into the never, never, wherever that may be, or whatever that may be. And then for your sake, I hope you were right. I hope you were right, and I hope we were wrong. I hope we were the fools that you say we are. Because if it turns out that we were right, and we were serving the right God, and that what the Bible has taught us for the last 6,000 to 10,000 years was right, then, my friend, you have got a massive problem to deal with. And you should start taking that into consideration, especially when you start realizing that you didn't create yourself. You just arrived here. And just like you didn't create yourself, and your life started somewhere, Your life has a timeline and your life is going to end. And then I said this yesterday on Facebook, and I'm going to close with this. You tell me to prove scientifically that there's a God, okay? I want you to prove for me scientifically what music is. What is it? Where does it come from? How is it birthed? I want you to prove for me scientifically imagination. I want you to prove for me scientifically love. I want you to prove for me scientifically hate. I want you to prove for me scientifically where the concepts of moral integrity are born and why we have them if we're just animals. I want you to prove for me scientifically why human beings have the capacity to even consider the reality or the possibility of God if we're only evolutionary entities based on billions of years of evolution. Why evolutionarily are we able to conceptualize these things? Show me that on your scientific experiments. We've got new gods in our world now, the gods of psychology and postmodernism, which have been born out of man's need to be autonomous. Same thing as the Garden of Eden. We want to do our own thing, and because we want to do our own thing, we find new gods to follow. Gods that promote ourselves as gods. But there's a lot of questions you can't answer. We can write and create music. We can paint, we can sculpture, we can do amazing things. We can do with technology amazing things that are almost artistic in nature. We can play sport to the point where it's artful. What is the scientific evolutionary purpose for these things if we are already the apex predators of this planet? So why do I believe what I believe? Because I choose to believe it. And I choose to believe it because I've experienced God's love and I've experienced God's miraculous work multiple times in not only my own life, but in other people's lives. And there's no scientific theory that you can present to me that will take away from my experience. And that's why I believe what I believe. What do you believe? What do you believe? And once you decided what you believe, then you must go and do the investigation of why do you believe it? And see where that takes you. Amen. Have a great day. God bless everybody. Cheers.